The town of Kembla was quiet in a way that felt heavy, like the air itself carried a memory of sorrow. Streets were cracked, paint peeled from the wooden shutters, and the wind often whispered through the alleys as if it carried secrets no one dared speak aloud. Among the few who still wandered these streets was a boy named Amari. At 12 years old, Amari was smaller than most boys his age, with skin the deep brown of polished mahogany and eyes that seemed to hold shadows from places no one had visited. He walked slowly, almost carefully, as though moving too quickly might shatter some invisible boundary between him and the world. People rarely noticed him, except for the occasional glance of suspicion, a whisper of "strange child," or the hurried step of someone wanting nothing to do with him. Amari had learned to live in the spaces between others. In the classroom, he sat at the back, watching the other children play during recess while feeling both an invisible wall and a distance he could not name. His parents, though present in the house, were distant. His father, a man with tired shoulders and permanent frown lines, spent long hours at the factory, and his mother, quiet and careful, seemed to fade behind the walls of their small home. Conversations were rare, hugs were rarer, and Amari felt an emptiness inside that words could never fill. But even in that emptiness, there was a rhythm. A subtle pulse that hummed faintly in his chest, so quiet that he had only noticed it in the moments of deep stillness, before sleep, when the world was hushed, and the wind seemed to hold its breath. At first, he thought it was his heartbeat. But it was different. The pulse felt ancient, deliberate, like a drum echoing through a space he could not see. Sometimes it whispered to him, not in words but in a vibration that stirred something inside, something both terrifying and comforting. The townspeople had their stories. They spoke of drums that summoned spirits, of whispers carried by the wind, and of souls that lingered when their time on earth had ended. Old women muttered these tales in corners of the market, while children repeated them with wide eyes and nervous giggles. Amari listened, always from a distance, fascinated and afraid. These stories seemed to brush against him, almost like they were not meant for ordinary ears but for his alone. On the edges of the town, past the crumbling walls of abandoned homes and gardens overgrown with weeds, Amari often wandered. He liked the quiet there, the stillness that made the pulse in his chest louder, more insistent. It was there, among broken doors and the scent of damp earth, that he felt closest to something he could not name. Sometimes he imagined it was a calling, a signal from another world, reaching for him. Still, he yearned for something simpler, to be seen, to be understood. Even in the small pleasures of life, there was a hollow ache. Watching a bird land on a fence, seeing a child laugh with friends, hearing the soft strum of a guitar from a distant home, these moments left him longing for a connection that always felt just beyond reach. He imagined having a friend who might sense the pulse too, someone who could share the quiet, the rhythm he could not explain. But no one did. And so he kept the secret inside him, carrying it like a fragile ember that might go out if touched too roughly. Even at home, the silence pressed on him. Nights were the hardest. He would lie in bed, listening to the creak of the floorboards, the distant drip of water in the kitchen sink, and the faint sigh of the wind. In those nights, the pulse seemed alive, speaking to him in ways he could not yet understand. It was as if it knew he was alone and wanted him to pay attention, to remember that there was something extraordinary hidden within him, waiting for a time when he could embrace it. And in the whispers of the town, stories of drums that called the dead, of spirits trapped between worlds, of voices only certain ears could hear, Amari felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was not entirely different for no reason. Maybe the world had a place for him, even if it was invisible to everyone else. He closed his eyes and placed a hand over his chest, feeling the gentle rhythm thrum beneath his fingers. It was small, almost timid, but steady. The silence around him felt vast, but within that silence, the pulse was there, patient, insistent, alive. And in that moment, Amari knew that whatever this was, it was part of him, and he would have to learn its secrets one day. For now, He simply listened, letting the quiet wrap around him like a shroud and the rhythm within him promise a future he could not yet imagine. Night had fallen over Kembla, thick and quiet, as if the town itself were holding its breath. The sky was a deep navy, dotted with a few pale stars, and the wind whispered through the empty streets. Amari lay in his small bed, staring at the ceiling, wide awake. His pulse was unusually still tonight, or so he thought. Then he felt it. A soft, steady thrum in his chest, faint at first, almost like a heartbeat. But it was different. Slower, heavier, as if someone, something, was drumming from within him. He froze, his stomach twisting in fear. The sound was not outside, it was inside, emanating from somewhere deeper than his heart. Amari's hand went to his chest. The pulse answered to his touch, as if it could feel him too. He sat up, breathing shallow, unsure whether to be afraid or mesmerized. He pressed both hands to his chest and listened. The rhythm was steady, insistent, and strange, unlike any heartbeat he had ever known. Curiosity overpowered his fear. He began to experiment, gently pressing, then tapping, trying to see if the rhythm would change. And it did. When he imagined someone dead, a person he had never met, the pulse grew sharper, louder, almost as if it was answering a call. When he thought of something alive, his mother, his father, the stray dogs in the alley, the beat slowed, faded, as though it was waiting for death to pass near. The realization hit him with both awe and terror. This was not a normal pulse. It reacted to death. He pressed his hands to his chest harder, trembling. "Am I cursed?" he whispered to the empty room. The thought made him shiver. A curse would be something dark, something no one could escape. But what if it was a gift? Something only he could hear, something that connected him to a world no one else could see. Before he could answer himself, a faint noise drifted from outside, a soft whimpering. Curious and nervous, Amari crept to the window and peered into the alley below. There, lying in the shadows, was the small stray dog he often saw scavenging near the market. Its body was still. Its eyes were closed, its chest unmoving. The drumbeat in Amari's chest roared suddenly, a furious rhythm that made him clutch at his ribcage. His stomach flipped. He sank to the floor, trembling, unable to look away. The dog was gone, its spirit, he realized, leaving the world, and the pulse inside him resonated with the loss. The drumbeat was alive. It mourned. It called. For the first time, Amari understood the depth of what he carried. This pulse, this rhythm, could not be ignored. It was alive in a way that frightened him, and it was tied to life and death itself. He felt awe and fear twist together inside him, a knot he could not unravel. The night stretched on, long and silent, except for the thrum inside him. He curled into a ball on the cold floor, listening, feeling every vibration as if the pulse were speaking to him in a language he had not yet learned. Each beat seemed to whisper, "Pay attention, remember, bear witness." He thought about his parents. They would never understand. They would call him strange, maybe even broken. The other children at school, friends, if they could even be called that, would avoid him even more. He was already different, and now this thing inside him made him more alone than ever. And yet, despite the fear, there was wonder. The rhythm had a beauty, a quiet dignity. It reminded him that even in death, there was a pattern, a pulse that refused to be ignored. He realized, trembling, that he had been given a responsibility no one else could bear. He could feel life leaving the world, and the pulse demanded that he see it, hear it, honor it. Amari lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling once more. The room seemed smaller now, the walls pressing in. But he did not want to run from it. Not yet. He could not. There was a strange comfort in knowing that the rhythm inside him was alive, that it would not let him forget, would not let him turn away. Outside, the town slept, unaware of the secret drumming inside a quiet boy. But Amari could hear it. And in that quiet, he felt the weight of the world press upon him, and, strangely, the first stirrings of a purpose. The pulse would be his companion, his burden, his guide, though he did not yet understand what it would ask of him. The first drumbeat had begun. And Amari knew that nothing would ever be the same. The drumbeat had grown stronger with each passing night. Amari could no longer ignore it. Its rhythm pulsed in time with something beyond the ordinary, something that seemed to stretch the world itself. Every time someone in the town passed quietly from life, even those he had never met, the pulse in his chest responded, louder and more insistent, carrying faint, whispering voices along with it. At first, Amari tried to convince himself it was his imagination. Whispers in the night, voices carried by the wind, shadows dancing at the edge of his vision, surely, he told himself, these were tricks of loneliness, the product of a boy's isolation. Yet the pulse would not lie. It beat with certainty, precise as a drum calling across a vast, unseen distance, and the voices, faint, fragile, urgent, sought him out. One night, as the moon painted silver streaks across the cracked floorboards of his bedroom, Amari pressed a hand to his chest and leaned back against the wall. The whispers were clearer now, just audible, like a breeze rustling through the trees outside. "Help," one murmured. "Please," another begged. A soft, sorrowful chorus that tugged at his heart. Amari's stomach twisted. He wanted to close his ears, to run from this burden, yet he could not. Empathy surged within him, along with fear. The weight of responsibility pressed against his small frame, pressing harder with each passing moment. What if he could not help them? What if he failed? He remembered his grandmother, the only person who had ever shown him warmth, who had held his hand and told him that the world was bigger than sorrow and fear. She had died when he was 10, and the memory of her death made the pulse resonate fiercely within him. That night, the whispers sounded like her voice, calling his name softly, blending with the drumbeat as if she were trying to reach him from somewhere beyond. Amari clenched his fists. I can't do this alone," he whispered to the empty room. It was then that the door creaked. He froze, heart pounding, and turned slowly. An old woman stood there, her frame hunched, eyes sharp and knowing beneath a cascade of gray hair. She wore layers of worn shawls, and there was a faint scent of herbs and earth around her. Her gaze settled on him, piercing yet gentle. "I see it," she said simply. Amari blinked. "See what?" "The rhythm," she said. "The drumbeat inside you. I've heard it before, though not for years. You are different." He swallowed hard, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. "Different?" "Yes," she replied. "You hear what others cannot. You feel what others ignore. The dead speak to you, Amari. And they will continue to speak until you learn to listen." A chill ran through him. No one had ever spoken to him this way, acknowledging the truth he had tried to hide, feared to share. Yet in her eyes, there was no judgment, only recognition, as if she knew exactly what it meant to carry such a weight. "Why me?" he whispered, voice trembling. "Why is this inside me?" "Because you are strong enough," she said. "Strong enough to bear what others cannot. But that strength will be tested. You must learn to trust yourself, and to trust them, the ones who have crossed beyond the world of the living." Amari hesitated. He had learned, over years of isolation, that trust was fragile. Even those who seemed kind could turn away, laugh, or dismiss him. What if she was wrong? What if she could not help him at all? And yet, there was something in her presence that made the pulse in his chest thrum faster, as if urging him to take the step he had feared. I don't know if I can," he admitted, voice barely audible. The old woman smiled faintly, reaching out a hand. "You already can, Amari. You have no choice but to listen. And soon, you will understand why." Over the next few nights, Amari began to hear the voices more clearly, each one distinct. Some were pleading for help, for closure. Others were angry, lost in confusion, desperate for attention. Some whispered secrets from lives long gone, stories that seemed to hover just beyond comprehension. He experimented cautiously, reaching out with his thoughts, trying to respond. It was exhausting, terrifying, and yet, it felt right. Each interaction left him drained, but it also left him with a strange warmth, as though he were doing something meaningful for the first time in his life. Yet the isolation deepened. He could not tell his parents, they would not understand. The other children at school would mock him or avoid him. And even the old woman, though wise, was only a guide, the burden was his alone. Each night, he lay in bed, listening to the whispers, feeling the drumbeat, aware that he was standing on the edge of something immense, something that would shape his life forever. He thought again of his grandmother, of the warmth she had given him, and realized that the pulse was not just a gift or a curse. It was a connection. It was love, sorrow, memory, and life itself. And for the first time, he understood that being different was not a weakness, it was a responsibility. Amari closed his eyes and let the whispers wash over him, the drumbeat rising and falling beneath his ribs. The dead were speaking. And he would listen. Days blurred into nights as Amari tried to come to terms with the gift, or the curse, that pulsed within him. The drumbeat in his chest had become a constant companion, rising and falling in rhythm with life and death around him. No longer just a faint, mysterious pulse, it now demanded attention, forcing him to notice things he had once ignored, a neighbor's quiet grief, a hidden injury, a family mourning in silence. At first, he tried to ignore it, to retreat into the familiar world of school and chores. But the rhythm would not be silenced. It throbbed insistently in his chest, and the whispers returned, sometimes urgent, sometimes sorrowful, always relentless. Amari began to understand that this was no longer something he could hide from. The dead wanted him to see them, to hear them, and perhaps, to help them. One evening, he wandered to the edge of town, where a small cemetery rested among overgrown grass and broken stones. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. Kneeling beside a fresh grave, he placed his hands over his chest. The drumbeat grew intense, almost painful. The whispering voices rose in a fragile chorus, pleading, searching, unfinished. Amari's mind reeled. He reached out with his thoughts, imagining the person buried here, trying to sense their story, their regrets, their last words. The rhythm responded immediately, vibrating through his body, connecting him to memories that were not his own. He saw flashes of a life, faint images of laughter, sorrow, and loss. A woman crying for her child. A man kneeling by a bedside, whispering apologies too late. The weight was almost unbearable. Amari's hands shook, sweat running down his temples. I can't do this, he whispered, collapsing onto the ground. But even as he said it, he knew it was impossible to stop. To ignore it was to deny a part of himself, a part that could hear the whispers and feel the drumbeat and carry the stories of those who could no longer speak. Sleep became a rare friend. Nights were long and restless, filled with the pulse of the unseen world. Every death, every passing, every quiet sorrow in Kembla resonated in his chest. He would wake, heart racing, palms pressed against the thrum, visions of grief and loss flickering in his mind. Sometimes he would see a face he had never met, frozen in pain or fear. Sometimes a memory not his own would pour into him, overwhelming him with emotions too vast for a 12-year-old to bear. Then tragedy struck closer to home. One of his classmates, Malik, a boy from down the street, was struck by a speeding bicycle late one afternoon. Amari had witnessed it happen from the schoolyard, frozen in disbelief. Malik's body lay still, and the pulse inside Amari exploded, pounding violently, demanding that he pay attention, that he bear witness. He ran to Malik, but there was nothing he could do. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of sorrow and pleading, filling his mind and heart. Amari's knees hit the ground, tears stung his eyes as he pressed both hands to his chest, feeling the drumbeat surge. He wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but he could not. Not yet. The rhythm demanded he stay, demanded he listen, demanded that he feel the weight of life leaving the world. When he finally staggered home that evening, parents waiting for him with worried faces, he forced a smile. They asked questions, gentle, concerned, "Are you feeling all right? Did something happen at school?" But how could he tell them? How could he explain a pulse that beat with death, a chorus of voices no one else could hear? How could he share the burden of knowing too much, the weight of seeing things no one else could see? So he kept it inside, pretending to be the quiet, ordinary boy everyone thought he was. Yet each day, the isolation grew. His parents grew concerned, their frowns deepening, their words more insistent. "Eat something, Amari," his mother would say. "You've been quiet again. Are you sick?" But he could only nod, forcing normalcy, while the pulse throbbed insistently beneath his ribs, reminding him that nothing could be normal anymore. Amari began to experiment cautiously, testing the limits of his gift. He would place himself in quiet corners of the town, hands over his chest, focusing on people he knew had passed, or those nearing death. He learned that some spirits were restless, clinging to unfinished business, lingering in pain. Others were gentle, their voices soft, grateful for attention, for the acknowledgement of their existence. Some, however, were angry, confused, bitter, and desperate, and their presence left Amari shaken for hours afterward. Each encounter left him physically and emotionally drained. Nights became longer, shadows darker, his sense of self stretching thin. He felt trapped between worlds, carrying both the living and the dead within him. And yet, amidst the exhaustion, there was purpose. A sense that he was meant to do this, to bear witness, to help. But the cost was high: loneliness, sleepless nights, a heart weighted by grief not entirely his own. And so, the burden of knowledge grew heavier with each passing day. Amari was no longer just a boy who walked the streets of Kembla unnoticed. He was a bridge between the living and the dead, a keeper of rhythms that no one else could hear. He was responsible for stories that had ended too soon, lives cut off, words left unsaid. Yet even in the darkness, even in the fear and isolation, Amari could not turn away. He had seen the faces, heard the whispers, felt the drumbeat surge. There was no escaping it. The pulse inside him demanded that he listen, demanded that he care, demanded that he bear the burden of knowledge, no matter how heavy it became. He lay awake that night, hands over his chest, feeling the rhythm in every nerve, every breath. Outside, the town slept, oblivious to the silent vigil of a boy who had become the guardian of those who could no longer speak. Amari closed his eyes, and despite the exhaustion, he whispered to himself, "I will try. I will listen. I will help." And in the quiet, the pulse responded, steady and patient, as if acknowledging that the burden would not be borne in vain. Amari had begun to understand the rhythm inside him as more than a pulse. It was a calling, a bridge, a tether between the living and the dead. Each day, the drumbeat grew stronger, more insistent, and it was no longer confined to the quiet corners of the cemetery or the walls of his bedroom. The world around him began to shift, subtly at first, until he noticed the edges of life and death blurring like watercolors bleeding together. It happened first at the abandoned mill on the outskirts of Kembla. The building had been empty for decades, its windows shattered and doors warped. Most children avoided it, calling it haunted, but Amari felt drawn there, his pulse quickening with each step closer. The moment he crossed the threshold, the rhythm in his chest became deafening, vibrating through every bone, every nerve. Shadows danced along the walls, and faint whispers filled the air, calling his name, begging for attention. He froze. The mill was not just empty, it was alive with the echoes of lives long gone. Flashes of memory appeared before his eyes: a man falling from a beam, a child crying for a lost parent, a woman clutching a basket of grain, shaking in fear. Amari pressed his hands to his chest, letting the drumbeat guide him. His stomach churned with fear and awe, but he could not turn away. He was standing on the threshold of something immense, something that no one else in Kembla could see. Night after night, Amari explored these forgotten places, the overgrown graveyard at the edge of town, the empty classrooms of the abandoned school, even the ruins of a house destroyed by fire years ago. Everywhere he went, the pulse responded, intensifying in the presence of lingering spirits. Some were gentle, faces serene, hands reaching out as if to thank him for noticing. Others were angry, shadows twisted with confusion and rage, demanding attention, their presence leaving Amari shaken and exhausted. He began to see patterns. Places where tragedy had occurred, accidents, sudden deaths, unresolved farewells, throbbed with energy, calling to him like a beacon. The rhythm inside him did not just react, it guided. It seemed to push him toward the stories left unfinished, the voices left unheard. And each time he obeyed, he felt both drained and fulfilled, as though he were connecting fragments of the world that had been broken by death. But with the discovery came danger. Not all spirits were benign. One evening, Amari ventured into a burned-out building near the river, drawn by a pulse that felt almost human in its intensity. Shadows coalesced into a figure, its eyes dark voids, and it lunged toward him, its anger palpable. The whispers became screams in his mind, the drumbeat thrumming wildly, warning him of the threat. Amari stumbled back, nearly falling over a broken beam. The figure remained, hovering in the darkness, rage radiating from it in waves. He realized then that not every soul would be thankful. Some were trapped in their own pain, unwilling to move on, and their energy could overwhelm him if he was not careful. He pressed his palms to his chest, focusing on the rhythm, grounding himself. Slowly, he felt the pulse steady, calming the storm inside. The figure wavered, then dissolved into shadows, leaving him trembling on the floor, heart pounding with both fear and triumph. As the nights went on, he discovered another kind of danger, not from spirits, but from the living. Townspeople whispered about him, calling him strange, an odd child who wandered the streets at night. Some skeptics had begun to watch him, curious and suspicious. One man, a local shopkeeper known for his harsh words and sharp gaze, followed him once to the cemetery, glaring from a distance. Amari felt the pulse spike with warning. The man's intentions were unclear, but the rhythm within him seemed to recognize danger in a way that words could not describe. He had to be careful, not everyone who saw him would understand, and some might try to exploit the unusual connection he had with the world beyond. Despite the threats, Amari pressed on. He could not stop. The pulse demanded that he act, that he bear witness, that he bridge the worlds in a way no one else could. And with each crossing, he learned more about the dead and himself. He learned to listen, to observe, to approach with caution and compassion. He began to see the stories of the dead not as frightening echoes, but as fragments of life needing acknowledgement. Yet the weight grew heavier. Each night, he returned home exhausted, his chest sore from the relentless drumbeat. Sleep became elusive, replaced by visions of faces pleading, crying, or shouting silently. He started to withdraw from his parents, from school, from any semblance of ordinary life. They noticed the change, worry etched into their features, but he could not tell them the truth. The burden of knowledge, the responsibility of hearing the dead, isolated him further. And still, he felt a strange power in it. The pulse was more than a signal, it was a connection, a rhythm linking him to unresolved fates. It whispered of things beyond death, of closure and forgiveness, of stories that demanded to be finished. He felt both fear and awe, knowing that the lives he touched, even in silence, were counting on him. One night, in the ruins of an old house that had once belonged to a family who vanished in a fire, the pulse in Amari's chest roared louder than ever. Shadows swirled, faces emerging from the smoke and ash, each one silent but desperate for attention. The old woman who had first noticed him appeared in his mind's eye, her voice echoing softly, "Balance, Amari. You must balance their world and yours, or you will be lost." The realization hit him like a tidal wave, the rhythm inside him was not just a guide. It was a responsibility, a calling. He could not ignore it, could not run from it, could not treat it lightly. Every life, every sorrow, every unfinished story depended on him. And if he failed, the consequences would ripple beyond what he could imagine. He left the ruins that night with a mixture of dread and determination. The pulse settled into a steady rhythm now, like a drum guiding him forward. He understood, for the first time, that this was his path. He would cross between worlds, he would face the angry and the gentle alike, and he would bear the weight of the dead with courage, no matter how heavy it became. For the first time, he felt the truth of the drumbeat resonate in his very soul. It was not just sound. It was purpose. And Amari, the quiet boy who had once wandered the streets of Kembla unnoticed, was no longer just a spectator. He was a bridge, a guardian, a witness to lives left unfinished, and he would answer the calling, no matter the cost. The rhythm inside Amari's chest had never been louder, never more insistent. It throbbed like a storm trapped beneath his skin, echoing through every bone, every nerve. The whispers of the dead had multiplied, overlapping voices that cried, pleaded, and begged. And now, for the first time, the drumbeat was calling him to someone he loved. It was his mother. Amari had been worried for days. She had not returned from the market, and the usually distant hum of her presence in the house was gone. His father had gone to look for her, muttering curses under his breath, and the silence that filled the home was heavier than anything Amari had felt before. But it was the drumbeat that told him the truth. Something had gone terribly wrong. He ran through the streets of Kembla, feet pounding over broken stones, heart hammering in rhythm with the pulse that now screamed inside him. The wind cut across his face, and shadows stretched long and twisted, but Amari paid them no mind. The voices followed him, overlapping cries, warning him, urging him onward. He reached the market just as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon. There, crumpled near the fountain, was his mother. Her eyes were closed, her body still. Panic gripped Amari, but he froze in disbelief, unable to believe what his chest already knew. The drumbeat roared inside him, deafening and unrelenting, shaking him to his core. "No, no, please," he whispered, dropping to his knees. The pulse slammed through him with the force of a tidal wave. His hands pressed to his chest, trying to contain it, but the rhythm would not be contained. It demanded attention, demanded action, demanded acknowledgement of life leaving the world. For the first time, Amari felt utterly powerless. His gift, which had once seemed like a calling, now felt like a curse. The drumbeat was not gentle. It was raw, primal, almost painful in its intensity. It was the heartbeat of death itself, echoing inside him, shaking him to his core. He closed his eyes, visions flashing before him, memories of his mother from before, laughing in the kitchen, tending to him when he was sick, her gentle voice humming lullabies that had long since faded from his mind. Now, those images were overlaid with something darker, something he could not escape. The pulse inside him had grown insistent, almost as if it were trying to guide him through the veil, to show him what could not be undone. Amari pressed his palms harder against his chest. The whispers swelled. They were not angry now, not accusing. They were sorrowful, gentle, echoing the loss that had just occurred. He understood, in that moment, that the dead did not seek vengeance, they sought acknowledgement, understanding, closure. And he had failed to protect the one person closest to him. Tears streamed down his face. He could not move, could not speak. The pulse throbbed violently, each beat a reminder of the connection he carried to life and death, and each beat a hammering of guilt and grief into his soul. The drumbeat filled his head, and he could see glimpses of the world she had left behind, choices not made, words left unspoken, love left incomplete. Amari thought of the old woman who had first guided him, her warning echoing in his mind, "Balance, Amari. You must balance their world and yours, or you will be lost." Now, more than ever, he understood what she had meant. The rhythm inside him was not just a gift, it was a responsibility. And the cost of that responsibility had never been so painfully clear. He clutched her hand, praying against hope. "Please, please, come back," he whispered. The pulse surged violently, almost as if responding to his plea. Then he heard a faint whisper among the others, "She is gone, she is gone." The words hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and he sank to the ground, his hands still clutching his chest as if he could somehow hold the rhythm in place, hold her life inside him. But the drumbeat was relentless. It pounded with a force that refused denial, echoing the absence of her heartbeat, reminding him that she had crossed the threshold, leaving him to carry both the grief and the responsibility of her passing. In the hours that followed, Amari wandered through the town in a daze. He visited the places she had loved, touched the objects she had cherished, listening to the rhythm in his chest and the whispers that accompanied it. The pulse was no longer just a signal, it was a conversation, a lesson in life and death, in love and loss. It told him what words could not, that grief was inevitable, that loss was unavoidable, but that compassion, understanding, and acknowledgement could carry both the living and the dead through the silence that followed. That night, he returned home, carrying the weight of her absence like a stone in his chest. He placed a small photograph of her on the table and pressed his hands over the pulse, feeling its steady rhythm beneath his fingers. Though the whispers were quieter now, they were no less insistent. They spoke of stories that needed to be told, of lives that required attention, of forgiveness that had to be given. Amari finally understood that the drumbeat would not allow him to turn away, no matter how much he wished to escape. He was connected, bound, and responsible for those who could no longer speak for themselves. And while the grief was overwhelming, it was also illuminating. It showed him the depth of his gift, the importance of his role, and the magnitude of the choices he would have to make in the days to come. For the first time, he felt a strange, painful sense of clarity. The loss of his mother was a wound that would never fully heal, but it was also a reminder that life, even in its most fragile moments, carried meaning. The drumbeat inside him was a bridge, a guide, a rhythm connecting the living and the dead, and it demanded courage, compassion, and resilience. Amari lay in bed that night, exhausted, chest heaving, tears soaking his pillow. The pulse was slower now, but steady, like the soft thrum of a distant drum calling him forward. He knew that the days ahead would be filled with challenges, grief, and tests of will, but he also understood something profound. The rhythm was not just a warning, it was a lifeline. He whispered into the darkness, "I will not fail them. I will not fail you." The pulse responded with quiet insistence, steady and unwavering. And in that moment, Amari realized that the path forward, however painful, was his to walk. He would carry the burden of knowledge, of life and death, and he would do so with the courage that had been awakened by loss. The drumbeat in Amari's chest was no longer just a pulse, it was a call. It surged stronger, faster, insistent and commanding, echoing the tension in the town as if life itself had pressed its hand upon him. The nights were alive with whispers, some frantic, some sorrowful, some angry. Every beat seemed to ask a question he could not yet answer, a test of courage and responsibility. It began with the old warehouse near the edge of Kembla, where rumors of shadows and strange happenings had long persisted. Amari felt the pulse pulling him there, insistent, almost desperate. As he approached, the whispers swelled, overlapping into a chaotic chorus. Faces appeared in the darkness, angry, pleading, trapped between worlds. Among them, a figure stood apart, radiating menace and sorrow. This spirit was different. It was not gentle. It was dangerous, powerful, vengeful, and its gaze seemed to pierce him directly, testing his resolve. Amari's heart raced, but he pressed his hands over his chest. The rhythm throbbed violently, a steady drum of warning and guidance. "This is your choice, Amari," it seemed to say. "Do you dare to help, or will you run?" He stepped forward, voice trembling. I can help you," he whispered. The spirit's shadow twisted, curling like smoke in the air, its anger palpable. It lunged forward in a swirl of rage, and Amari staggered, clutching his chest. The pulse surged in response, a violent, thunderous drum that shook his body to its core. He remembered the old woman's words, "Balance, Amari. You must balance their world and yours, or you will be lost." She had guided him before, but now the choice was his alone. To act was to risk himself. To refuse was to deny the dead their peace. The spirit's voice echoed in his mind, distorted and raw, you cannot save everyone. Some must suffer to teach the living. Some must pay. Amari's hands shook. The whispers of countless others joined the chorus, pleading for attention, begging for help. He felt the weight of every life that had passed through Kembla, of every soul lingering, of every story left unfinished. And he realized that the drumbeat was not just a signal, it was a responsibility. Every beat was a life asking for him to act, to choose, to bear the consequences. He closed his eyes and let the rhythm guide him, steadying himself. Images flooded his mind, the faces of those he had helped before, the stories he had preserved, the sorrow he had carried, and the grief of his mother, still fresh in his heart. Courage was not the absence of fear, courage was moving forward despite it. Amari focused. He let the drumbeat lead him, listening to the pulse of life and death in tandem. The vengeful spirit approached again, its form coiling in anger, its whispers slicing through the air. He reached out with his mind and heart, extending empathy and understanding as best he could, even as fear surged like wildfire. I see you. I hear you. You are not alone, he murmured. The spirit recoiled at first, anger flaring, but the pulse inside him resonated, responding to his intention. Slowly, like smoke dissipating in sunlight, the figure softened. It no longer lunged, no longer screamed. It hovered, uncertain, waiting. And then, in a whisper only he could hear, it spoke, "Thank you." Amari collapsed onto the floor, hands over his chest, breath coming in ragged gasps. The drumbeat slowed, steady and strong, a rhythm of completion, a rhythm that acknowledged the choices he had made. He had acted, and the cost had been immense, yet he had succeeded. The responsibility had weighed heavily, but he had met it with courage. The night was quiet again, almost peaceful. The town outside seemed to exhale, as if the resolution of one spirit had eased the tension of many. Amari felt the weight of his gift, heavy but purposeful, and he understood the truth that the drumbeat had been guiding him toward all along. This was not a curse. It was a calling. A bridge. A means to honor life and death. In the days that followed, Amari faced smaller choices, each testing his resolve. A neighbor's pet died quietly in the alley, a forgotten man passed in his sleep at the edge of town. Each time, the drumbeat pulsed, guiding him, reminding him of his responsibility. With each decision, he learned more about balance, when to intervene, when to listen, when to bear witness. The burden was still heavy, but it was now a source of strength, not fear. He returned to the old woman, seeking her counsel. She smiled knowingly, as if she had anticipated the transformation. "You see it now, don't you?" she asked. "The rhythm is not punishment. It is purpose. But it will always demand courage. It will always challenge you." Amari nodded. "I understand. I have a choice, and I have to make it, every time." "Yes," she said. "And remember, it is not the drumbeat that chooses you. You choose it. You choose who you help, how you help, and when you act. That is the courage it asks of you." The lessons were clear. The rhythm in his chest was not just a signal of death or sorrow, it was a call to empathy, to action, to the recognition of life in all its fragility and beauty. It was a reminder that he was part of something larger, that his gift was both a responsibility and a privilege. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the streets of Kembla in amber light, Amari walked through the town. He could feel the drumbeat in harmony with the world, a steady rhythm that guided his steps. He paused at the cemetery, placing a hand over his chest, feeling the pulse settle. The whispers were soft now, content, resolved, like a choir of voices at peace. He realized that the choice he had made, to embrace his gift, to act with courage, to balance the needs of the living and the dead, had transformed him. He was no longer just the quiet, isolated boy who wandered the streets unnoticed. He was a bridge, a guardian, a listener, a guide. The drumbeat was his constant companion, a reminder of responsibility, compassion, and empathy. Amari smiled faintly, feeling the pulse steady, strong, insistent. The voices of the dead were quiet now, resting, their stories acknowledged, their fates gently guided. He knew that challenges would continue to come, that difficult decisions would demand courage, but he also understood that he had the strength to meet them. The rhythm was not a curse. It was a purpose. And for the first time, Amari felt a deep, quiet pride. He had made the choice. He had faced the fear. He had acted. And in doing so, he had discovered who he was meant to be, a guardian of stories, a bridge between worlds, and a boy who had learned that courage was the heartbeat of everything worth saving. The rhythm in Amari's chest had changed. It was no longer frantic or insistent, no longer a relentless call that dragged him into fear and uncertainty. Now, it was steady, a quiet heartbeat of purpose. It pulsed in harmony with the world around him, guiding his steps, whispering in subtle rhythms the stories of life and death, sorrow and hope. Kembla, once a town heavy with shadows and whispers of old grief, now felt different. Small signs of life returned, flowers pushing through cracks in the streets, laughter carrying across the market square, neighbors greeting each other with smiles. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped low or the night grew still, the drumbeat echoed gently within Amari, a reminder that he was a bridge between worlds, a guardian of the unseen, a keeper of stories that demanded to be honored. Amari had learned to walk with the rhythm, to act with care and compassion. Spirits came to him, some in sorrow, some in need of guidance, others simply seeking acknowledgement. He did not rush. He listened. He understood. And through him, they found peace. One evening, a small group of villagers gathered near the old fountain, drawn by a sense they could not explain. A young girl had lost her grandmother, and her cries had stirred the pulse within Amari. As he approached, he felt the whispers of the departed grandmother, not angry, not restless, but calm and patient. Amari knelt beside the girl, hand over his chest, feeling the pulse settle, steady and gentle. "Your grandmother is here," he said softly, placing a hand over the girl's. "She's at peace now. She wanted you to know that she loves you, always." The girl's tears eased into a small smile. "Really?" she asked, her voice trembling. Amari nodded, the rhythm inside him flowing like a gentle tide. He felt the grandmother's presence leave with a sigh of relief, her story acknowledged, her life honored. And as he stood, he realized that this was what the drumbeat had always been for, not just a warning, not just a burden, but a bridge, a rhythm connecting life to life, death to understanding, sorrow to healing. In his home, he felt the warmth of his parents for the first time in years. They had noticed his quiet strength, his ability to remain calm in situations that once would have overwhelmed him. They could not know the full extent of his gift, but they sensed the change. His father no longer scowled at his silence, and his mother, now returned, her presence a gentle reassurance, smiled at him with a quiet understanding that needed no words. Even the old woman returned, watching from the shadows with her quiet, knowing gaze. "You've done well," she said. "You have embraced the rhythm, and in doing so, you have brought peace to many. But remember, Amari, this is not the end. It is a life you carry forward. Every heartbeat, every choice, will be guided by what you have learned." Amari nodded, placing his hands over his chest, feeling the drumbeat steady beneath his fingers. He understood now that the rhythm was not just in him, it was part of the world, part of life itself. Each pulse was a connection, a reminder that the living and the dead shared the same fragile space, that empathy and care were as important as breathing itself. As days turned into weeks, he continued his work quietly. He visited old cemeteries, abandoned homes, and quiet streets, listening, acknowledging, guiding. Some nights, he would hear the faintest whispers of gratitude, the echo of stories finally completed. Some nights, the pulse simply hummed, a reminder that balance had been achieved, that harmony had been restored, at least for now. The town began to notice subtle changes, though they could not explain them. Cracked streets seemed less oppressive, gardens bloomed unexpectedly, and children played in places that had once felt too dangerous or empty. Amari walked among them, quiet and reserved, yet present, his gift a silent force that nurtured both life and memory. One night, as he sat beneath the ancient tree in the town square, he felt a familiar presence. The old woman appeared beside him, as she often did in quiet moments. "Do you feel it?" she asked. Amari closed his eyes, hand over his chest. The rhythm pulsed steady, gentle, warm. "Yes," he said softly. "It's at peace." She nodded. "Then you have found your place. You are no longer just a boy with a gift. You are a guardian. A bridge. A keeper of life, death, and stories. Never forget the rhythm, Amari. It will guide you always." He smiled faintly, feeling the pulse settle into a comforting pattern. It was not just a sound, not just a beat, it was a connection, a promise, a reminder of the life he had chosen to embrace fully. For the first time, he did not feel fear, nor isolation. He felt purpose. And in the quiet of the night, as the stars glimmered above Kembla and the town slept in gentle peace, Amari listened to the whispers one last time. They were soft now, content, their stories acknowledged, their journeys completed. The rhythm within him resonated in harmony with the world, a steady, unwavering drumbeat that reminded him of love, loss, forgiveness, and the delicate balance of life. He stood, feeling the cool breeze on his face, and walked through the streets with a calm heart. Life and death, sorrow and joy, the seen and unseen, all were intertwined. And in that interweaving, Amari had found his place, his purpose, and his courage. The drumbeat continued, steady and strong, a companion, a guide, a source of hope. And Amari, once a quiet, isolated boy, now moved through the world with quiet strength, compassion, and understanding, a young guardian of the unseen, carrying harmony wherever he went. The rhythm of life and death pulsed within him, gentle, eternal, and whole.